Welcome back to Message from Serenity's podcast, the podcast that inspires you to live in your best version mentally, physically, and spiritually. I'm your host, Tiara. In this episode, we're finishing our special segment dedicated to educating and inspiring more growth and development in the Black community. And today, our very special guest is actress, writer, and producer, Kellee Stewart. Thank you so much, Kellee, for coming on to do this. I just personally want to say thank you. This means a lot for me for you to take time out of your schedule. So again, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to be on. I appreciate it. I'm honored.
Yes. And so many of you may know Kellee from film and television, but she's also a big advocate in fertility with women. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, I mean, as a collective on this topic, Black women, we have the highest fertility and reproduction issues from, any other woman. And I think part of that is based off, could have something to do with us having to work harder and longer than most women. And that could take a toll on our health. And so I feel like as a collective, even like within the Black community, like egg freezing, for example, is not a topic that's, widely talked about or even like considered. Even with myself, I never considered even freezing my eggs until I met you and I heard your story. And it just got me thinking that it's probably something that I should do. I mean, I do have a daughter and I want to continue a family when I get older. But right now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in my early 30s. And so having a family continuing that has taken a back seat. But it wasn't until I heard your story that it actually got me considering that this is something that I should look into. And for other women, too, who are not very, educated or have given much thought to freezing their eggs. So I'm so glad that we have women like you who are out there, who are raising awareness, who are educating women about fertility.
Yes. First of all, not just that we go through infertility more than other races and counterparts due to stress or working harder. It's actually underlying conditions that we may not be aware that we're suffering from, such as fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS, blocked fallopian tubes. Black women in particular suffer from fibroids about 3 times as much as their white counterparts. And if you know anything about reproductive health, fibroids are non-cancerous tumors, but it is all about location, and also the size. So if you have fibroids inside of your uterus, especially if they are at a pronounced size, that is going to cause infertility. Endometriosis is when the endometrial lining grows on the outside of the uterus instead of the inside. That's also another form of infertility. And so what happens is we usually don't know our fertility status until we're trying to have a baby and it doesn't work. And that's when we learn, oh, there's an issue. But we have indications almost all of our life. If you have heavy periods, very painful periods, very long periods, that's an indication of fibroids. You may not know that you have them. If you have infrequent periods or there's no real schedule, sometimes you skip 3 months, that could be an indication of PCOS. So there's many reasons. If you have sex that you think is uncomfortable, or you feel like if you're having sex with a man that the male counterpart is too big and it's uncomfortable, no, that's an indication of an underlying condition like adenomyosis. Your periods should be normal. They should have a consistent flow. The blood should be a certain color. There's all of these things that we're not taught about our reproductive health. And the last thing I'll mention about that women need to know before we get to the egg freezing portion of it is that their menstrual cycle is a vital sign. Medically, it is deemed a vital sign. So just like your oxygen level or your heart rate is considered a vital sign, anything that's a vital sign is something that's an indication of life or can bring death. If you don't have any more oxygen, you're not going to survive. If your heart stops beating, you're not going to survive. Your period is medically labeled under that same thing. It can bring life, as we know, but it can also bring death if these underlying conditions are not dealt with. So that's the first block that needs to be understood as it relates to infertility and how we can learn about our underlying conditions just based off of our monthly cycle, should it be monthly or not.
That's so true. That makes so much sense. I have family members, and we'll get into your story, who have period issues, but then it's been linked to fertility, I guess, problems. And it's due to them not having regular periods, or it's being like really heavy where it's like bleeding on months on end, and having to go to the doctor for that. So thank you for sharing that. That's real gems right there. So for people who are not familiar with your story, can you share a little bit about how you came into this? How did you come into being an advocate, first off? And then I guess we can talk a little bit about you freezing your eggs.
Yes, well, I became an advocate because after I froze my eggs when I was 37 years old. I froze 29 eggs. I yielded 32 in one cycle, and 29 were viable and frozen. And I wrote a movie about it, and I sold it to Lifetime and A&E, and we were ready to start production, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I still wanted to talk to the audience that I wrote the movie for. And though the movie was put on the shelf and we're still figuring out when it's going to be made, I was like, well, I need to stay like connected with the people in this community that I wrote this movie for. So I started doing an online Instagram show called Warrior Wednesdays. Now, this was really just for me to gather Black women and men. I don't just advocate for women and men, because men, in all cases where someone with sperm and someone with eggs are trying to conceive and it's not working, 1/3 is due to male factor infertility. 1/3 is due to female factor infertility. So we're equal. But the face of infertility since the beginning of time in this country has been given to women, although men, male factor infertility is equal parts, 50-50 of the reason that infertility exists. They just don't know about sperm count, mobility, if they have blockages. So those things that happen. But that being said, I wanted to speak specifically to Black and brown people because we are not part of the national conversation about fertility health. So when I started doing Warrior Wednesdays on Instagram, I exclusively only speak to people of color and doctors of color so that we are aligned in our community and we can take away some of the stigmas that Black people are not infertile. For instance, going all the way back to the times of enslaved Africans, it was thought that Black women were breeders because we were breeding more people to be enslaved. Or you can go back to J. Marion Sims, who this country calls the father of gynecology, who was a doctor doing procedures on women, enslaved African women without anesthesia. So we were used to test for white women, for other people's procedures without anesthesia. And that's what this country calls the father of gynecology. So there's biases and stigmas and myths about Black people being fertile that all need to be debunked. And so it became my mission to really highlight our stories, and so that we could tell our truth and take away the suffering in silence that we're failures because we're not able to conceive, or we're failures because I don't have a baby yet and I'm 34. You know, whatever stigma you may have, it was my goal to speak directly to people that look like me.
And that's why I'm so glad I met you, because you're actually the first woman that I know who is an advocate in fertility. Like I have to say I educate myself on a lot of different things, but when it comes to fertility, I've I feel like I've never had like issues down there like that. So I've just kind of been ignorant and even learning in that degree. But it's good to actually like know and be aware. And so we have women like you who are actually educating women on fertility.
And, there's many Black women in this space that I occupy in terms of being a fertility advocate. That Regina Townsend from the Broken Brown Egg, TJ Payton, who wrote a book called Semen Secrets because her husband went through male factor infertility. Shaquita Lockley, who is the director of Eggs Over Easy documentary that I participated in, that was on OWN, on Oprah Winfrey Network. Coach Jesse, who deals with fibroids. There are many, many, many Black fertility advocates in this space. But because, again, we have this myth that there's nothing wrong until we try and then we figure out we're not getting pregnant. Nobody seeks out the information prior to there being a problem. So they don't even know that we've been out here advocating for our own health, as well as going to Congress to advocate for insurance to cover IVF, to cover, procedures for fibroids and different things. So we have a large community of Black and brown advocates in this space.
It just needs to be sought out. Or in your case, I only know about it because I follow you on Instagram and I know that you're an advocate for it. So now I'm going to be joining Warrior Wednesdays and listening to that, which we'll get into later in the segment. So you talked a little bit about you froze your eggs at 37. So what was that journey like during that process?
Sure. Well, I was in a relationship for 7 years and I kind of knew it was over after the second year, but sometimes we stay a little longer than we should past the expiration date. And so by the time it was over, I was 37 years old and I was single and I was like, because I've always wanted to be a mom. And what I didn't realize, and I learned the hard way, is that I gave away my best baby making years to the wrong relationship. And I always say that because for women in particular, we are born with as many eggs as we're ever going to have. We do not make eggs the way that men make sperm every single day, every hour of the day. Women do not make eggs. And we think we're only losing one egg a month when we don't get our period. It's true. You're losing one mature egg, but you're also losing any number of follicles that went with that ovulation cycle. And a follicle is a fluid-filled sac with an egg cell in it, and they all could have become eggs. And that's part of the egg freezing process. So I'll explain that later. But at 37, when the relationship was over, I decided, let me go to the fertility specialist right away and see if I'm a candidate for this so I can preserve as much as my potential fertility as possible, because I don't know how long it's going to take to find the right partner or the right time. I just didn't want to give up any more of my fertility time. And I went to the doctor. I had an ultrasound and a blood test to test my AMH and FSH levels, which any woman can do at any time. You can do it today.
What is
just
that?
So you know, that's a fertility diagnostic test. So your AMH is your anti-Müllerian hormone, and your FSH is your follicle stimulating hormone.
Okay.
And I just want to be clear, I didn't know about these things either until I went to freeze my eggs. That's a blood test that gives doctors an indication about how many eggs you have left, not the quality of those eggs. That's a different conversation. But a general understanding of what percentage you fall under for your age category, about whether or not your fertility is high, meaning you have a good amount of eggs left, or whether it's low. I recently spoke to a woman that's 38 years old and she had a 0.05 AMH level, which means that she's perimenopausal at 38.
Oh my God.
That would be the number that in an average is somebody that's over 55 would have. So she's going through menopause and she's not even 40 years old yet. So these are things that women can get tested for and they don't even know. So she's living her whole life thinking she has all this time to have a child and doesn't even know that she's perimenopausal until she went to to go freeze her eggs. That's actually her story. But I got this testing done and they told me that I was a good candidate. And the process is that you take injections in your abdomen about 10 to 14 days. And what that does is it kind of mimics your FSH hormone, your follicle stimulating hormone. So it brings up as many follicles as it can in a cycle, and it matures instead of just one follicle into one mature egg, it matures all of them into an egg. And at a certain time that they normally would have released into the fallopian tube to be fertilized, that's when you take your trigger shot, and the doctor then 12 hours later will extract the eggs in a procedure. You're put to sleep, doesn't hurt. And you wake up and you rest for about 3 days and freeze your eggs.
Wow, that sounds like a journey. But you said it doesn't hurt, so that's good. It's not like you're in pain during any of it.
No, I mean, the injections, I don't like needles. So if you don't like needles, you're going to have a little bit of a problem.
Needles.
But call a friend. You know what I mean? I called my mom and I flew her out here and I bought her, I remember it was during Christmas. It was my Christmas present to myself. I bought her a diamond ring that was shaped like an egg. I made it fun. You know, you can do it on Zoom with a friend, and it's about a 10 to 14 day process. So you do have to take about 2 weeks out of your life. You do have to go back and forth to the fertility specialist daily for blood tests, because we're mimicking nature here. So they need to test the size of the follicles. They need to make sure these hormones are working. So you're consistently being tested because it's a very delicate cycle. It's one little tiny cell, an egg cell. And we want to get as many of them mature as possible and extract them. And then they have to survive the freeze. So even though I got 32 eggs, only 29 were viable, meaning they had the proper amount of chromosomes and health and survived the freeze. So that's why you will always freeze less than you extract. But, you know, usually what they'll say is if you get around 10 to 15, they consider that a successful cycle. If you do not, they will most likely suggest that you do it again, because the whole point is you want to yield as many eggs as you can and bank them and freeze them, because on average, if you have about 15 eggs, maybe one of them will be a live birth.
There was a question I was going to ask about. So when you do freeze your eggs, do they freeze them? Like, do you have to pay to freeze all of that one batch, or do you have to pay per egg?
No, you freeze that batch. Okay. And, depending upon the fertility clinic and how each clinic does their different way, but you can buy a 5-year freeze, or you can pay every month. For me, I bought 5 years, and then you go on an auto pay every month to keep it stored. It's called storage. So you're paying for storage. You're paying for your eggs to stay frozen and stored in their happy little chilly place until you're ready for them.
Yeah. And so that
if you need them, by the way, just because you freeze your eggs doesn't mean you're going to use them. It's about preserving that potential fertility in case you find yourself in a situation where you need them.
And moving on from that, just with the whole process, I know can be expensive. Are there any options for women who may consider wanting to freeze their eggs, but they may not have the money to do it? Is there any sort of
for one, if you're employed, you should go to your employer and ask them, do they have insurance for infertility? Because basically what I went through, when you freeze your eggs, you're going through the first stage of IVF. That's what you're going through. And if the employer says, no, we do not have any insurance for infertility, you need to ask them why. That's the first thing. Don't just take that answer. Because if you take that answer, you're not being proactive about your own life. Secondly, you have to ask yourself and prioritize, what do I really want? This was a life choice. I was investing in my future. This wasn't a purse. This wasn't a vacation. So if this is something that you really want to do, you might have to sacrifice some other things in order to do it. Now, one of the things that I always suggest to women that are in a financial situation where they feel like they can't afford it is I always ask them, how many baby showers do you go to a year? And how many engagement parties? How many weddings do you spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars on per year to celebrate other people's life choices? And I always tell them, throw yourself an egg shower. Have no shame about it.
Mm-hmm.
Get some people together, order a pizza, and say, hey, I'm freezing my eggs. I'm throwing myself an egg shower just like you did a baby shower. In the same way that they register at Target and they register at Babies R Us, and we
Yes.
go and spend money and give them a gift, register at PayPal.com. Register at Venmo.com. Invite your family, your friends, your coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Do whatever you got to do to get the encouragement and the financial support that we give others when they're having a baby. Why shouldn't you do the same thing? Cut you up some cucumber sandwiches, make up some games, and throw yourself an egg shower. Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Where there's a will, where there's a way. I love that. And your egg shower was the first one I've been to. I had never been to an egg shower, but I love the idea. It's genius. And you're right. Like, if we are spending money on buying stuff for other people with baby showers and, we want to freeze our eggs and, if the lady may not have the money, why not, go out there, throw a little egg shower, ask for some donations to help you fund being able to freeze the eggs. I love that.
Yeah, tradition has to really change. It has to evolve the same way that we evolve, baby showers is a tradition. It's a tradition. So what?
Mm-hmm.
Create your new tradition. And also it's helpful for men that date women. It's also helpful for them to understand that if you're wasting a woman's time, if you know that you don't want to have a child with her, if you know this isn't somebody you want to go long terms with, understand that she, even if she's not aware of it, may be giving you years that she can't get back in her biology. I was giving my relationship of 7 years, not just my effort, not just my, let's see if we can communicate better. I wasn't just sticking with him through thick and thin. I didn't understand. I was giving away my biology. And once I understood that, I was like, oh, he didn't deserve that. This relationship did not give to me what I sacrificed by staying in it. Yeah. And when I started speaking publicly about it, I will never forget, I get hundreds and probably thousands at this point of DMs from people about fertility. But my favorite one was actually from a man that lived in New York and said to me, I just listened to an interview that you did. And I realized I've dated somebody for about 4.5 years and I loved her, but I knew I wasn't going to marry her. I always knew she wasn't the one, but I was selfish and I didn't want to let it go. And I just realized that she gave me her best baby making years. And she's moved to a different state now after we broke up. And I want to offer to pay for her if she wants to freeze her eggs, because I didn't realize what she was sacrificing for me. And he asked me for recommendations for clinic in the new state that she lived in. And I thought, oof.
That's so sweet.
What a man to say, oh, I didn't even get this. I didn't even realize what this was costing her, when I knew the whole time I really wasn't going to take it the distance. Wow. So you have to be cognizant, not just as a woman, but as a man. Don't waste people's time. If you're not going to go the distance and you know for a fact that they want to have kids, don't waste your time and don't waste somebody else's time.
Yeah. Especially in those prime years. You can't get that back. You can never get that back.
No.
And so that leads me to my next question. Like, what would you tell women that are in their prime years, who are just like enjoying life, who's not really thinking about having a child, or busy ladies like me in my career who really don't have time to, develop a family and with relationships and stuff like that. Or ladies who are in a relationship, who may have a long term, like you in the case, and, you haven't had a child yet. What would you say to those women?
Well, even though I froze my eggs, I do not tell women to freeze their eggs because I believe that's a personal, financial, and spiritual decision.
Yeah.
So that's not something that I necessarily say outright. But what I do advocate for specifically is to get a fertility diagnostic test. So to answer your question specifically, what would I tell a woman that's living her life, that's doing her career, that may or may not be in a relationship, that may or may not want kids, she doesn't quite know yet, is listen. You you even think for a second you may want to be a mom one day, get a fertility diagnostic test. Get your
Fertility
AMH
diagnostic
and your
test.
FSH
Okay.
levels tested so that you know where you stand in your fertility. And if you are a candidate for something like egg freezing, you might want to think about your age, the timing of that, and is this something that I should do to give myself a little bit more time to live my life, make my choices, and not, settle for the wrong relationship without the burden of feeling like I'm running out of time. Because
Yeah.
again, men continuously make sperm. That doesn't mean that they're fertile. I got to be very, very clear about that. But women were born with as many eggs as we're ever going to have. And when they're gone, they're gone. That's it. And the quality of those eggs do change over age and environment. For instance, if you are eating out of plastic, if you're putting microwave food that comes in a plastic container, you're killing your eggs. Plastic environmentally is not good for your eggs. So, certain things that you put in your body will reduce the quality of your eggs. However, what definitely will is age. So you do have to know that. You're not spoiled. You're not a failure. You're not old, but it's just something that in the biology of life and the way we were created, a woman with age loses fertility, and so does a man. It's just not talked about. They lose mobility. If a sperm tail has any if it's abnormal in any way, it will not fertilize an egg. Oftentimes, when somebody with sperm and somebody with an egg are trying to conceive and they can't, the woman automatically is tested first, which is wrong, because this country we live in makes women the face of infertility. It's assumed before anybody's tested, it's assumed her body is the one that there's an issue and why we're not getting pregnant. Well, here's why that's wrong. First of all, there's male factor infertility and there's many things. Hassan Minaj, who's a comedian, just did a Netflix special, and he starts off by talking about the fact that for 4 years he was trying to have a baby with his wife and it didn't work, and he found out he was the problem. That's the first line of his special on Netflix. It's out right now. But a man is tested. It is far less invasive. You know what I'm talking about. They have to give a little sample of a thing, and they go in a room with a video and they do their thing. It's far less invasive and it's far less expensive. When a woman is tested, there's an HSG test where they have to put a dye in your fallopian tubes. That's uncomfortable. They have to do, and it's much more expensive. There's a lot more that goes on in our body because our body carries the baby. And that is if we're born with a uterus. There's a condition called MRKH where some women are born without a uterus. Some women are born without ovaries. There's a lot of reasons that this happens. So, but yes, I digressed a lot there. But what I will say is I would suggest getting an AMH FSH test. And when you're partnered with someone that happens to have some sperm, if that's your choice, if it's not working, get the sperm tested first.
So go get those tests and the fertility diagnostic test.
You can do that now. You do that whether you're single, married, whatever. I don't care how old you are. How many eggs you have left. Go get your blood drawn. And they also sometimes do an ultrasound when you're on your cycle so you can see the follicles in real time, how many are coming up for your next ovulation. And that will give them an indication about what you're working with. Go do that now. That's my suggestion.
That's the easiest thing that you can do. Just easy peasy, go do that. And that just makes so much sense, just kind of going back to what you were saying about just like with age, like anything pretty much like dies like over time. So yeah, definitely. If you're a woman in your prime, go get those tests done.
Even somebody that is 25 can get it, and someone that's 44 that still wants to have a baby, and you're still having a cycle, go get your AMH and FSH levels tested. You never know. Okay, there's women that are 22 that are infertile, and there's women that get pregnant at 54 by accident. So we have to take this ageism thing completely out.
True.
But what we do know on an average, what we do know medically and scientifically is that it is most likely as you age, you lose eggs and the quality of them. That is
Right.
a fact. And then there are cases that are different than the fact, like a 20-year-old that can't have a kid and a 54-year-old that's popping them out.
Mm.
Those are the exceptions to the rule.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about your Warrior Wednesdays? You mentioned it um, before, but so that's on Instagram, and you're speaking with people in the fertility world, giving out education to people. And what time does that happen? What time do you do
Well,
that
I used
on?
to do it every Wednesday, but then
Okay.
I slowed down because the fertility community luckily wanted to fly me around to talk to different clinics and
Oh,
doctors and
cool.
host award shows and things like that. So I've had an opportunity to take this outside of Instagram.
Okay.
For instance, I just came from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine convention in Anaheim, California, where I spoke on the Reproductive Justice Summit as well as the
Mm.
Social Media Summit. I went to New York and lit up the Empire State Building orange for
Oh.
National Infertility Awareness Week, along with Ali LaForce, who is a sportscaster and fertility advocate. I am leaving in 2 weeks to host the Night of Hope Gala in New York City with Resolve, which is the
Oh.
National Infertility Association, at a beautiful venue with Chloe Melez, who's an anchor from CNN. And so we'll be hosting that. So I've had a lot of opportunities to take it outside of the
Mm.
Instagram space. So it's not as regular as it used to be.
Okay.
As you were at the egg shower, I will be doing a Warrior Wednesdays episode with the two women that won the free egg freeze, along
Okay.
with Dr. Colin Smykel from Laura Fertility, who will
Mhm.
be performing those procedures. So you just have to check my Instagram to see when I'm on. Sometimes I'm on Wednesday, sometimes I'm on a Thursday, and I'm calling it a Warrior Wednesday pop up. You just have to check when I'm on, because now I've what I'm doing is I'm following the purpose, and the purpose
Yes.
is it needs to expand beyond Instagram. I do have a website though, so you can see all of the
Yes.
episodes at warrior-wednesdays.com. So if you have any
Okay.
questions, and they're always, labeled, if it's mental health, we have Dr. Lori Johnson, who did an episode about fertility and mental health because she specializes as a psychologist in people dealing with infertility. We have fibroids episodes. We have an episode with the men, with people that
Mm.
went through male factor infertility, adoption. I talked to Dr. Cindy M. Duke, who is the head of the Nevada Fertility Institute, who is a fabulous fertility specialist and endocrinologist and a virologist. And she's my warrior doctor. I put that in air quotes because she comes on frequently and answers
Okay.
questions, which are basically like a free consultation. And she
Okay.
answers questions sometimes for 2 hours. Sometimes we're on live for
Mm.
2 hours, and the room is full of people that are hearing everything from menopause to egg freezing to fibroids to endometriosis treatments to myomectomies. I mean, birth control, everything under the sun. If it happens below the belly button, I'm talking about it.
I love that. So, for everyone who is listening, warrior-wednesdays.com, that is where people can go to get that information to see what you're doing currently and in the future.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it. I love it so much. And you know what? I have one more question, if that's okay. It's a mystery question.
Oh, okay. I like a mystery.
Okay, so it's not too bad. So what is something that a lot of people don't know about Kellee?
That a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Um, Scared too.
I did that kind of cut out.
Scared that I'm scared too.
You're scared too.
That let me finish. That I'm scared as well. Maybe I'll put it that way. That I'm scared it'll never happen for me as well. A lot
Oh.
of people don't know that I'm scared too. That
Mm.
I'm not, even though I'm an advocate,
Mhm.
even though I speak about it publicly, even though I've researched my head off about reproductive health and
Mhm.
reproductive justice, I'm still a person who really wants to have a baby who hasn't had a baby yet.
Mhm.
And I'm still scared whether or not that will ever happen. And so I wear two hats. I wear an advocacy hat. And I also wear, but I'm still just me that wants this thing that hasn't happened yet. But what I do know for a fact, I'm a woman of faith, is that, when God plants a seed in you, he will build a purpose. So I made a plan to be a mom one day, and that hasn't happened yet. But I am fertile with purpose. And I have given birth to something I never expected to. And by saying that, what I mean is when I froze my eggs, it was not my mission to be public about it. I simply wanted to freeze my eggs, put away my fertility, and move on with my life. So I met the right person. We can get married, have a baby. And if it doesn't work, I got these things in the bank. That's all it was for. It wasn't for y'all. It wasn't to be on a podcast. It wasn't to throw an egg shower. It was just something I was doing for my life. However, God called me to it. And I became an advocate almost by accident. Just, writing a movie and then not being done. And then, I want to, I'm an artist. I want to stay in this space. And I started talking to people. And before I knew it, I felt like I was part of their tribe, part of their club. And because I'm blessed with a platform to be able to speak to these issues and call people and say, hey, will you talk about this publicly with me? It just took off. And then I said to myself, wow, I don't think I was waiting for a partner, a man to have a baby. Maybe I was waiting to meet all of you. Maybe I was to be on your podcast to talk about these issues that may help another person, to host Warrior Wednesdays and help other people. This is what I was meant to do before or if I ever become a mom. But what people don't know about me is I am scared too. Using that fear in the best way I can, which is to use it to help other people versus allowing it to make me feel, bitter or like a failure or I haven't found the right person. I'm trying to use it in a good way that helps other people.
And it is.
And we have some warrior babies too. I have people I've interviewed that couldn't get pregnant that had their babies.
Wow.
And it's a blessing. It's a blessing to see.
And I just thank you so much. I commend you on being just so candid and real in sharing that, because that is something that, a lot of women who are at a certain age, my sister, for example, she's afraid that she won't have any kids, and she's at that age, like basically 40. And even like with marriage, just I feel like it's kind of like a thing with women. Like we feel like we need to have this either by a certain age, or like if we don't get it, it's like, oh my God, like what is wrong with me? But it's all in due time. It's all on God's time. And who knows, like you could still have that family. You could still have a child, even if it's not with a partner like that. It's still possible. But I get what you're saying. Like you want to have that traditional family, but it's just like you said, having faith and having hope. That's pretty much, you just leave it in God's hand, let the universe take care of it.
And maybe, your podcast coming in time with you coming to the egg shower and you even just sharing the things that your sister is experiencing right now. Maybe this episode will help her. Maybe you'll be able to say to her,
she's
now,
interested
go get your
now.
AMH and your FSH checked.
Yeah.
Girl, go get it checked and see if you can freeze. And maybe you'll be throwing an egg shower for her or with her.
I already told her about it. She's like, oh, really? I want to know more about it. I said, well, make sure that you check it out, because she's going to be talking about it.
Hey,
so she's
sister.
already,
Hey, sister, throw yourself an egg shower, girl. It's never too late. And what I will say is that regardless of your circumstances, there's always, an option. And egg freezing isn't just about, I want to have a baby one day and my circumstances aren't lining up. It's also about the woman who has cancer and she has to go through radiation.
Yeah.
And if she wants to have a baby one day, she has to freeze her eggs because the radiation is going to kill those cells. Doctors will tell a female patient, before this chemo, before this radiation, we have to freeze eggs if you want to have a child one day. It's also about, the mother that went to Dr. Cindy M. Duke's office because her 14-year-old daughter hadn't had a period yet, ever. And so she was like, all her friends had their period already, and she hasn't started hers yet. I just thought I'd bring her to get an examination. And after that examination, Dr. Duke took the mother into a room and said, I'm going to tell you some very hard news. Your daughter was born without ovaries, and which means she'll never have a period because she has no eggs. But because Dr. Duke is so amazing, what she said to her, and this woman was in her 40s, that if your daughter wants to have a child one day, she will have to use donor eggs. She has a uterus, but she doesn't have ovaries. But what we can do is we can freeze your eggs. This mother was in her 40s. And if she would have the opportunity to be biologically linked to her child, if you freeze your eggs, because it's a cell.
Right.
So what it means is she's just borrowing your DNA, and that way she will be related versus a donor egg where she's not. And of course, that mother was like, oh my God, I will do as many rounds as possible to bank eggs so that when my 14-year-old daughter turns 35 and wants to start her family, she'll have this as an option. Doesn't mean she'll use it, but it'll be there. And so freezing eggs is far more than just, I don't have a man or I want to do my career. I also have a friend that went to freeze her eggs that found out during the process, because you have to go through a whole panel and screening, that she had breast cancer. Because of that panel, because of her desire to have a baby one day and going to freeze her eggs, she had to get all of these tests done, the same that I did, and something came up abnormal. And they looked further and found out she had breast cancer. So her desire to freeze her eggs saved her life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about stories.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Kellee, for coming on and educating, inspiring, and sharing your knowledge. I really do appreciate it. And I'm sure that it will help someone out there. Just like how, we met and I had no idea about freezing eggs for really, like, fertility is not really something that I've looked into. But because of you, you have inspired me to look more into fertility. I'm going to go get my levels checked. I'm going to get my fertility diagnostic test done because I do want to have a family, like, when I get older, like add on. And so it's just not something that I've considered, but I'm not getting any younger.
Any
like you were
younger,
saying,
right?
I'm not getting any younger.
Get it done, and let me know
Yeah.
if you need any help understanding what it all means. But I love that you're saying that, and that's really all it is. It's just taking control of your future.
Taking
It's
control of
described
your
is
future.
taking control of your future. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kellee, again,
Thank you.
for coming
Thank
on. I
you.
appreciate it.